Around the year 803, a delegation of Arabs arrived in the city of Aachen in modern Germany. They were from Baghdad and had come to meet with Charlemagne. Charlemagne was known as the King of the Franks in northern Europe, and also, for the past 3 years, as the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, although Rome itself had been in decline for some time. Charlemagne was the first individual to hold this title since the collapse of the Western Roman Empire more than 300 years earlier. The greater European power now resided to the east in Constantinople, in the form of the Byzantine Empire, which is sometimes referred to as the Eastern Roman Empire. As befitting a ruler of Charlemagne's stature, the Arabs brought gifts from their own master, Harun al-Rashid in Baghdad, who is perhaps best known to us today for his numerous appearances in the book The Arabian Nights, or Tales from 1001 Nights. Charlemagne's court notes that among Harun al-Rashid's gifts were a carved ivory horn, a gold tray and water pitcher, a pair of intricately engraved brass candlesticks, bottles of perfume, a chess set, and bolts of fine cloths, including silk. The delights also included a robe fit for a king. On it, the following legend was embroidered: "There is no God but God." This was a statement of faith. The Christian Catholic European Emperor and the Sunni Muslim Arab Caliph, in spite of their religious differences, could each agree on a common God. As splendid as these gifts were, another object filled the emperor and the entire court with awe, according to Charlemagne's official biographer. This was a water-powered clock, the likes of which had never before been seen in Europe. Apart from keeping the time, the clock chimed on the hour every hour. Now, this clock didn't meet with universal approval among the Franks. Some of Charlemagne's advisors thought it a work of sorcery, or Mohammedan devilry, as they called it, and they suggested that the clock should be destroyed. Wiser heads prevailed. The Frankish chronicler describes it as a marvellous mechanical contraption in which the course of the 12 hours moved according to a water clock, with as many brazen little balls which fell down on the hour and through their fall made a cymbal ring underneath. On this clock there were also 12 horsemen, who at the end of each hour stepped out of 12 windows, closing the previously opened windows by their movements. In this lecture, we're going to spend some time getting to know Harun al-Rashid and his role as midwife to what would become known as the Islamic Golden Age, between roughly the 8th to the 13th centuries. It was an era of shining intellectual, cultural, and technical innovation. At the same time, the age was no stranger to intrigues at court, nor within the vast empire, much less with rival empires in Europe. I'll break down the material into 3 sections. First, we'll consider Harun al-Rashid and his predominantly ethnic Persian advisors. These were led by a family of civil servants and soldiers known as the Barmakids, originally from modern-day Afghanistan, who helped elevate al-Rashid to power and later lost their positions of trust. Secondly, we'll become acquainted with the origins of the educational establishment known as the House of Wisdom, which was the engine room in Baghdad for the Golden Age. And third, we'll make a brief survey of the Arabian Nights, a collection of Middle Eastern and Indian fairy tales, romances, legends, fables, and parables, whose enduring popularity helps explain why Harun al-Rashid's name enjoys such enduring fame. So let's get started by asking ourselves, who was Harun al-Rashid? what was his background, and what was the state of the Abbasid Empire he inherited. Harun al-Rashid was born in 766, or possibly 763, near Tehran in modern-day Iran. His mother was a strong-minded former slave named Khayzuran, originally from the Yemen. His father was the Caliph, Muhammad al-Mahdi, who was the supreme religious and political leader of the time. Harun's first name is the Arabic equivalent of the biblical Hebrew name Aaron, meaning a high place or exalted. The surname of al-Rashid, which was bestowed on him later, is Arabic for the rightly guided, upright, or just. So we might think of him as Aaron the Just. Only a few years before Harun al-Rashid's birth, his great-uncle had led a successful revolt against the former Arab Muslim dynasty known as the Umayyads, based in Damascus. His grandfather, Abu Ja'far Abdullah ibn Muhammad al-Mansur, succeeded the uncle in power and founded Baghdad as the seat of the new caliphate. This would be known as the Abbasid dynasty, and it would rule over the entire Islamic Golden Age, from 750 until the Mongol sack of Baghdad in 1258. During the Abbasid uprising, a family of Persian origin from the city of Balkh in the northern part of modern-day Afghanistan supported the revolt and had been richly rewarded during al-Mansur's rule from 754 to 775. This family was known as the Barmakids, and 3 generations of Barmakid family members played important roles in the development of the Abbasid Empire and in creating the conditions for the Golden Age to flourish. It was also very influential on the young Harun al-Rashid. Alexander the Great first captured the Barmakids' ancestral home of Balkh in about the year 330 BC and called it Bactra. The territory fell to the Muslim Arabs' expansionist aims in about 663, and the Barmakids, although originally Buddhist leaders, moved to Basra in southern Iraq and converted to Islam. At the time of the Abbasid rebellion against the Umayyads, the family patriarch Khalid ibn Barmak administered its territory in modern-day Iraq, overseeing military forces and collecting the local land tax. The Barmakids were also known for their tolerant views on religion and philosophy, and they would come to be known for their support of the emerging arts and sciences during the Islamic Golden Age. In about the year 779, the young Harun, as a boy of about 14 at the time, was named to lead an Abbasid military expedition against the Christian Empire of Byzantium. He was accompanied by Khalid ibn Barmak's well-trained and capable son Yahya, who looked closely after his royal charge and ensured that the mission would be hailed as a success. That the 2 men subsequently ended up in jail together proved to be only a temporary inconvenience. Khalid ibn Barmak had himself run afoul of al-Harun's grandfather, al-Mansur, at one point, though he was well regarded by al-Harun's mother, the former slave woman, who helped restore his privileges. Al-Harun's elder brother, al-Hadi, briefly ascended to the caliphate, but he died shortly after, under mysterious circumstances. And so al-Rashid, now 20 years old, became the 5th Abbasid Caliph, while Khalid ibn Barmak's son, Yahya, was made vizier or chief minister. The year was 786, or, according to the Islamic calendar, 170. And Baghdad was the largest city in the world outside of China. From its carefully planned foundation just 2 decades earlier, Baghdad had grown into a sprawling metropolis with a population of between 800,000 people and possibly as many as 1 million. And the greater Abbasid Caliphate stretched from modern-day Morocco in the west to modern Turkey in the north and eastwards across Persia and Afghanistan into Pakistan and up to the Aral Sea and portions of Central Asia. About 20% of the world's population lived within the Abbasid Caliphate at its peak, which covered 8% of the Earth's land surface. That notwithstanding, the Arabs themselves still lagged behind the artistic and cultural achievements of other civilizations, such as China, Byzantium, and Persia, reflecting their very recent emergence as a world power. One result is what we might characterize as awe in the face of older, grander civilizations, and sometimes, perhaps, even feelings of inferiority. Consequently, Harun al-Rashid's fondness for and appreciation of Persian civilization can be seen as influencing his decision to surround himself as Caliph with Persian advisors, most notably the Barmakids. In my introduction, I described the House of Wisdom in Baghdad as the engine room of the Islamic Golden Age, and so it was. Although the heights of this golden age lay a generation or more ahead, al-Rashid's caliphate was empowered by a large degree of territorial security at home and an overflowing treasury, as well as the new caliph's love of learning, particularly poetry, and the pleasure he took in listening to the tales of popular storytellers. And so, among al-Rashid's contributions to the Islamic Golden Age were the first steps he took toward establishing the largest depository of books in the world in Baghdad. It was a concentration of learning and literature that would flourish for close to 450 years. This nexus also evolved into an important new intellectual force known as the translation movement, which preserved ancient works and ignited new thinking. Scholars in the employ of Harun al-Rashid made use of the collective wisdom of any and every civilization they came into contact with. They started by eagerly copying works from ancient Greece and Persia. From there, the net spread, taking in texts for translation in the Chinese and Indian languages, as well as a multitude of Middle Eastern languages, including Hebrew, Aramaic, Syriac, and Assyrian. The Caliph himself was said to be personally interested in poetry and philosophy. But he also employed scholars to conduct original research in a myriad other subjects, including astronomy, astrology, medicine, physics, mathematics, geology, and metallurgy. Indeed, Harun al-Rashid paid for the construction of astronomical observatories. Even now, almost 1,300 years after Baghdad's rise, and 850 years since its fall, I can feel cash-strapped scholars and researchers the world over turning green with envy. Harun al-Rashid's adventure in learning was also assisted enormously by something the earlier caliphate, the Umayyads, had gained for the Middle East: the technology required to make paper. Imported from China, either immediately after the Battle of Talas in 751 or very shortly thereafter, affordable papermaking on a large scale radically altered the translation process and made possible widespread transmission through the simple expedient of producing multiple copies of any title. Scores of scribes were necessary for this translation work and for the production of multiple copies of individual titles. Non-Muslim, Jewish, Christian, Zoroastrian and other scholars were all employed and well paid. These were not unwilling workers, scribes as galley slaves chained to their desks. Quite the reverse. Such employment was very much sought after, regardless of race or religion. It shouldn't come as a surprise to you that when members of Baghdad's wealthy elites saw the interest and investment Harun al-Rashid was ploughing into scholarship, they too decided to throw some money in the same direction. It's funny how discovering one has a common interest with one's monarch can loosen the purse strings. Soon, wealthy merchants and military men were sponsoring their own scholastic efforts. After starting with translations of mathematical and tactical manuals from Persia, India, China, here too, locals soon produced their own new work. And while many of the greatest advances of the Islamic Golden Age were yet to come, I can't go wrong by listing a few of them. They would include many of the principles of algebra, geometry and trigonometry, as well as star tables and almanacs, with which one could forecast such natural phenomena as a lunar eclipse. The achievements of the age also included the ability to measure the Earth's circumference, and with the ability to accurately know the time and calendar date. One of the greatest of these advances was not specifically embedded in the arts or sciences at all, but rather in human conduct. The Islamic Golden Age represented a time and place in world history when faith and reason, religion and science were allowed to peaceably coexist. In the sprawling collection of folk tales known as 1001 Nights, which have provided delightful storytelling opportunities for centuries and kept many a lamp burning, Harun al-Rashid is depicted as a powerful caliph who walks among his people in disguise at night. His royal court exudes opulence and perhaps a hint of menace. Many Western fantasies about what used to be called the Orient come from these tales. And if there's intrigue in the air, then Harun al-Rashid is at the center of it. Interestingly, Harun al-Rashid comes out of these stories looking pretty good. He is often set among trusted friends, such as his Persian viziers, and hard-drinking poets, including those who represent the state and others who challenge its norms. The overall suggestion is that he was a beloved character, or at least looked upon fondly by his subjects. Indeed, he is often presented as a sympathetic, thoughtful ruler. Known formally as 1000 Nights and a Night, or in Arabic as Alf Layla wa Layla, there's no definitive collection of these stories. In their first centuries of existence, the tales existed solely in the oral tradition of storytelling. The collection grew over time, with roots in various places, including India, Persia, and the Middle East, and even, believe it or not, in Europe, where the earliest French translators invented and inserted stories of their own, beginning in around 1710 and continuing through the 18th and 19th centuries. The earliest fragments of the written Arabic texts comes from the early 9th century, and even after the stories were written down in Arabic, they weren't set in stone. The tales came west in the early 18th century, at which time Harun al-Rashid became a man whom Western poets and writers also loved to laud. Memorialized in poems by Longfellow, Tennyson and Yeats, and in novels from James Joyce's Ulysses to Salman Rushdie's Harun and the Sea of Stories, al-Rashid's fame continued to grow, including in films for children and adults alike. A short eponymous poem by Longfellow, in which the Caliph is reading and musing on great kings that have come before him, concludes with these poignant lines. O thou who choosest for thy share the world and what the world calls fair, take all that it can give or lend, but know that death is at the end. Harun al-Rashid bowed his head, tears fell upon the page he read. But not everyone harbours such great sympathy for this Abbasid dynasty, not historians nor his contemporaries. Reynolds A. Nicholson, the late English scholar of Islamic literature, considered al-Rashid a perfidious and irascible tyrant, whose fitful amiability and real taste for music and letters hardly entitle him to be described as a great monarch or a good man. Throughout his 23-year reign, revolts broke out in one corner of the Abbasid Empire or another, including in Egypt, Syria, and Yemen. The rival Idrisid dynasty established an independent territory in Morocco in the year 798, and another group, the Aghlabids, carved out a semi-independent territory in Tunisia just a year later. Al-Rashid further undermined his own legacy by devising a succession plan that envisioned one of his sons becoming the Caliph, or supreme religious and administrative authority, while another son would command certain provinces and some military forces. This was bound to end in disaster, and it did. Three great empires controlled vast swathes of the earth at the time. Byzantium, centered in Constantinople, with which al-Rashid frequently clashed, the Franks under Charlemagne from Rome in the north, and the Abbasids in Baghdad. In the year 798, Charlemagne sent a diplomatic mission to Baghdad to sound out al-Rashid about an alliance, and the Muslim Caliph immediately saw the favourable implications of such a possibility for himself, as well as his empire, by gaining leverage against the Byzantines in Constantinople and the Umayyads in exile in Spain. And so, al-Rashid decided to send a collection of very special gifts to Charlemagne over the course of 3 separate diplomatic exchanges. The most spectacular of these, in the form of an elephant, walked under its own power into Aachen, Germany, in the spring of 801, near modern-day borders with Belgium and Holland. This is one historical artifact that sounds very much like something from the Arabian Nights. As for the startled Franks, perhaps not since the days when Hannibal had crossed the Alps had anything like this been seen in Europe. At the time, Harun al-Rashid undoubtedly saw his own Islamic-sponsored culture in the ascendant, and in general superior to Western European cultures. Even so, he was keen on making contact with the West. As a rule, the gifts demonstrated the highest standards of artistic and cultural achievement then available in the Abbasid Caliphate, although it's not entirely clear where the elephant came from. And such offerings were carefully and deliberately selected. They were meant to impress, and they did. Alas, the ancient timepiece, water clock, the one that chimed on the hour every hour, no longer exists. Although the carved ivory horn, the tray and pitcher, and some of the chess pieces, and the robe all do. They're now housed in various European museums. For that matter, the alliance of Al-Rashid and Charlemagne itself never formally came to pass. Very shortly afterward, Al-Rashid's reign encountered a much more severe shock than regional uprisings in the provinces. Now, wealth had poured into the Abbasid treasury during all this time. It was said that Al-Rashid's wife insisted on table settings that glittered with gold, silver, and jewels, and that the palace was filled with concubines and entertainers. But the Barmakids fared perhaps better than anyone. Their influence was far-reaching, as reputedly were their unceasing efforts to enrich themselves. Al-Rashid's vizier, Yahya, had two sons, Al-Fadl and Ja'far, the latter of whom was known for his love of parties and good living, and who was particularly close to Al-Rashid. In a dispute whose particular details are lost to history, Al-Rashid ordered his dear friend Ja'far executed in 803, and parts of his body displayed in different parts of Baghdad. The father and brother, Yahya and Al-Fadl, were both imprisoned and died there. Then, in the fall of 808, Al-Rashid himself fell ill while on his way to putting down a revolt in Khorasan, in modern-day Iran, and he died shortly after. Baghdad would arguably reach the pinnacle of its cultural greatness under Harun's firstborn son and successor, Al-Ma'mun, who reigned for 20 years, from 813 to 833. Al-Ma'mun may have spent more money on the House of Wisdom than his father did. He might have attracted the Baghdad scholars in greater number, and scientific and artistic advances continued apace. But among the black marks on Al-Ma'mun's time in power would be that he secured rule only after a civil war saw him defeat and execute his half-brother, Al-Amin, under the ill-advised succession arrangement devised by their father. And even then, Al-Ma'mun took to persecuting Muslims whom he feared were disloyal, or who didn't share his beliefs. This was a grim time, likened to the later Spanish Inquisition. Indeed, much of Al-Ma'mun's caliphate would be marked by a protracted civil war, and the beginnings of serious financial and political worries for the Abbasids. Local governors periodically challenged the Caliph's authority, producing upheaval that would see Baghdad fall into the hands of Shia rivals a few decades later. Al-Ma'mun also renewed fighting against the Byzantine Empire. So it's easy to see why later Muslim historians looked back on Harun al-Rashid's time as Caliph as a favourable period by comparison. Now, some will say that the Arabs offered very little positive in the so-called Islamic Golden Age, merely cracking the whip while others did the work. But the far more important, exciting, and positive foundation of Baghdad's House of Wisdom is the idea that Harun al-Rashid wanted all of his multi-ethnic peoples to work together with scholars from other, often older, civilizations, and whose learning could be added to and enhanced by working with others, regardless of religious faith or ethnicity. Professor Hugh Kennedy at the University of London's School of Oriental and African Studies has said that Baghdad in the time of al-Rashid was both prosperous and innocent. Of course, I'm not sure how innocent Baghdad was, or indeed that any city is, come to that. And it very much depends on how one defines such a thing. But today, more than 1,000 years later, Harun al-Rashid, of all the names from early Islamic history, is probably the best known in the West. It doesn't matter if we're talking about caliphs or princes, generals or preachers, wise men, fools, or anyone in between. The fifth Abbasid Caliph and the founder of the House of Wisdom holds a unique place in the popular imagination. Perhaps even stronger in the West than it does in the Muslim Middle East. Of course, that is in part because most people in the Middle East know a little more of their own history than we typically do, and so are much more able to choose from a wider cast of historical characters. But oh, those Arabian Nights, they do hold a mixture of truth and fantasy.